Good afternoon and welcome to Insight. Well, it has been an eventful week in the United States of America. Outgoing President Barack Obama gave his farewell speech elaborating his achievements in the last 8 years, and the President-elect Donald Trump had his first press meet after a gap of over 150 days, in which he rubbished the document alleging he was compromised by Russia, blamed intelligence agencies, gave few guarantees on Obamacare, sent Big Pharma stocks plunging, and got into some chaotic exchanges with reporters. While these developments transpire, experts believe that India-US relations, which have prospered over the years, will continue to grow even under Trump leadership. President Barack Obama outlined his achievements in his farewell speech in Chicago 2 days ago. He was first elected in 2008 on a message of hope and change.
I've worked to put the fight against terrorism on a firmer legal footing. That's why we've ended torture, worked to close Gitmo, reformed our laws governing surveillance to protect privacy and civil liberties. That's why I reject discrimination against Muslim Americans. The unemployment rate is near a 10-year low. The uninsured rate has never, ever been lower. If every economic issue is framed as a struggle between a hardworking white middle class and an undeserving minority, then workers of all shades are going to be left fighting for scraps while the wealthy withdraw further into their private enclaves.
Now, his successor, Donald Trump, has vowed to undo some of Mr. Obama's signature policies after he is sworn into office on 20th January.
Obamacare is the Democrats' problem. We are going to take the problem off the shelves for them. We're doing them a tremendous service by doing it. We could sit back and let them hang with it. We are doing the Democrats a great service. So as soon as our secretary is approved and gets into the office, we'll be filing a plan, and it was actually pretty accurately reported today, the New York Times, and the plan will be repeal and replace Obamacare. We're going to have a health care that is far less expensive and far better. Russia and other countries, including China, which has taken total advantage of us economically, totally advantage of us in the South China Sea by building their massive fortress. Total. Russia, China, Japan, Mexico, all countries will respect us far more than they do under past administrations.
Creating history for a minority ethnic community that comprises just 1% of the US population, 5 Indian Americans took oath as members of the Congress last week. Donald Trump will take the presidential oath on January 20th, following which more clarity will emerge on his domestic and foreign priorities. And as the two biggest emerging powers, the rise of both China and India has drawn close attention from the rest of the world, especially from the United States, currently the dominant power in the international system. The United States is concerned not only with the speed of growth in India, but also the developments of relations between the two have that way prospered. The bilateral relations have improved over the years, and scope of partnership between the two nations has widened. So some of the key questions we delve into are that has India-US relationship, have they strengthened during Obama administration? What were the key highlights? What about the hurdles that obstructed the relations in the past? What will be the future of China-India-US triangle? Will India remain a priority for Trump administration? And moreover, what lies ahead for India-US ties? And to talk more on this, I'm joined by Ambassador Surendra Kumar, who's also President, Indo-American Friendship Association. I'm joined by Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, who is Pro-Vice Chancellor, JNU, also heading the Center on American Studies. And I'm also joined by Mr. Ranjit Devraj, who is the editor, Interpress Service. Welcome to the program. I'd like to start the discussion with you, Professor Mahapatra. Let's just look at the key features of President Obama's farewell speech and Donald Trump's press meet. What is it basically for the Americans particularly with this kind of transition? Is America really headed for a new era of growth and development which is going to be defined by a new leader, or are things really going to remain more or less the same?
Let me start by saying that the US has entered into a period of great challenges. And certainly challenges also bring along with it different kind of opportunities. Now, when you talk about the farewell speech by a gentleman who spent 8 years in the Oval Office of the White House, obviously he was trying to tell the American people and the world about what he has achieved in his own perception and analysis. As far as domestic issues are concerned, he said for a long time millions of Americans, 40 million plus Americans, did not have even access to health insurance, and without health insurance life is very, very difficult in the United States. And he was successful in at least starting an Obamacare program where 20 million American people could have access to affordable health care insurance plan.
Right.
Number two, he said for a long time, although people celebrated the diversity in the United States of America, a lot of people, particularly the migrants and the LGBT community and the women, were marginalized and deprived of opportunities to rise up in the social ladder. But he made it his plan to make LGBT community more acceptable, and in fact today in all 50 states LGBT have become acceptable community to the mainstream American citizens. Number three, he said when he entered the White House, the economic condition of the country and the world was in a pathetic situation because of the financial meltdown in the United States, which had global ramifications. And he promised that he would try to set it right, and he would try to create jobs. And Obama himself gives his own set of statistics to say that for last 75 months consistently the employment rate has grown in the United States.
Right.
A lot of things need to be done, but he has achieved that. In matters of foreign policy, he said he wanted to promote a liberal policy. He closed down the war activities in Iraq as promised during the campaign, and then he reached out to Iran and he struck a nuclear deal. Without firing a shot, Iran gave up its plan to the suspected nuclear program.
So has he lived up to the promise of change and hope which he had made in the beginning when he was first elected?
If you make an analysis, actually historians will have enough time in the future to go deeper into what he has achieved and what he has not, and they will come up with their own kind of analysis and conclusion. But as of now, in a short time, when you talk about Obama's 8 years in the White House, I think he has been successful in bringing about certain changes, as I explained, both restoring the economic normalcy in the country and reaching out to the LGBT community and giving more respect to the immigrants, and even catching up Osama bin Laden and finishing him off. So there are a lot of achievements during his administration.
And he did not miss either of those points while he was making that farewell speech. Ambassador Kumar, how eventful have been these years, particularly for India-US ties?
Well, I think it has been great tenure, especially last 2.5 years. Modi has met 9 times. He has come to India twice, became the chief guest at the Republican Party. And even after the nuclear deal, yes, it was big ticket during George Bush, but nuclear deal liability issue was hanging. They did bring it to. US and India were on 2 different pages about climate change. They did come together. Paris Agreement could not have been signed without Modi and Obama coming together. Defense, now defense trade last 5 years is 15 billion. Then you have a logistic agreement. They have been dragged. This is very significant because so much reservation from our defense ministry, our expert, that we are trying to be too cozy to say that too tight and embrace that you can't breathe. You may have to allow their bases, and you all can. But thing is, if you analyze it, it facilitates greater transfer of technology, higher access to other. That is not only, even humanitarian people say that, but for this is not publicized, American help, we couldn't have evacuated so many Indians from Libya so easily. They did support us. So there are so many aspects of it. Apart from that, I think he has been largest number of appointees of Indian Americans in administration. It took place during so many youngsters. They may not be top persons, but they have already entered the system. That you will find that within 5 years or so, they will come up in a playing role. So he has been very, I think, very respectful to the Indian Prime Minister, very encouraging to the kind of opening economy. Modi ji says the ease of doing business. Certainly, there are other issues on which you can always. There are issues. You got Libya or Afghanistan or Pakistan, especially Pakistan. In India, nothing pleases, displeases how the president of US says. If Trump says nasty thing about Pakistan, he is hailed here. The day he phone called to Nawaz Sharif and says a terrific guy, all Indians read your
faces fall.
So you have very limited
one would like to understand, Mr. Devraj, do you think, and as is being pegged, that the civil nuclear agreement and the kind of approaches which were made from the both administrations then, that was a turning point in India-US ties, relations?
I think since 2000, we've been on a trajectory which encourages greater and greater. I mean, it has to be slow because for so many years, during the Cold War years, we were at loggerheads. So since 2000, since Bush's famous announcement and through the Manmohan Singh years, and also now Prime Minister Modi, they've been carrying it very vigorously, carrying it forward. So I think it's on a path that is there's a certain direction to it. It's very difficult to see any change in that, even through the Trump presidency. He'll have to honor those commitments. And I think if you look at the Indo-US nuclear deal, so much has happened since. It's been slow. There have been hiccups all along. But if you look at the liability thing, or if you look at the deals that are going to be, I think we expect to be signing some concrete deals.
But one would also like to, the fact that President Obama and Prime Minister Modi, India that way became the 4th country to have a direct hotline now with the US there. So the fact that, of course, much can be attributed to the leadership of both the sides, but how much do you think has been the contribution of India's own growth story in bringing these two countries together?
No, certainly. I mean, it's a variety of factors, but definitely the diaspora in the US, the Indian diaspora in the US played a major role. And definitely, even now, I think as the ambassador pointed out, so many young people are now in the US administration. I mean, during the Obama years, that's been the great thing, really, that you see so many Indian faces, prominent people. And I think over these years, there's a certain amount of trust building that has happened, which couldn't have happened before. I mean, that's how I would look at it.
Ambassador Kumar.
Well, you talk about overseas Indians or the Indian Americans. Some figures came, they constitute now roughly 1% total population.
That's right.
They also constitute now 1% of the people in Congress.
Right.
So you have 4 congresspersons and 1 senator. It's the largest ever. So in terms of we are doing very well. Now you have been seeing somebody called Salabh Kumar or some who come on the television. He has been saying that we have not seen what will happen during Trump. Trump himself, when addressing the, I think, thank you rally in Florida, said, I'm going to the best friend of India's White House. Now only time will tell, because these kind of speeches the public are saying. But fact is, there is another way. Just last month, I think, holidaying Havana, when Obama signed the DD, that declares India as a major defense partner. Once you come in that category, without being allies like NATO or others, you really have access to that kind of, which is a trust.
That's an interesting thing, in fact. Professor Mahapatra, how important have been the defense cooperation and partnership at the heart of this India-US relations? Is that one of those chapters which cannot be ignored?
This is the most significant aspect of Indo-US relationship, actually. If you talk about the political, economic, social and defense is number 1. If you think and compare in terms of economy, the total US-China trade is about $598 billion. Indo-US trade is a paltry sum of $100 billion.
Right.
But if you think in terms of defense and security,
and we want to increase it to $500 billion.
Yes, if you think in terms of Indo-US defense cooperation, it has been having an upward trajectory since 2000 onwards, ever since Bill Clinton came to India and signed a vision statement with Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji.
Right.
Right. Now, Whether you talk about the military exercises across all the services, whether you talk about India buying more and more American military equipment, whether you will discuss in terms of defense technology and transfer of technology initiative, trade and technology initiative, all these things have been going in the positive direction. But what is significant now, as again Ambassador Kumar was pointing out, is the defense partnership. You know, during the Bush administration, they elevated the position of Pakistan into a major non-NATO ally. Now, towards the end of Obama administration, the India's position has been elevated to the level of defense partnership. Now, US-Pakistan relationship is getting into muddy waters for a variety of reasons. But this defense partnership actually is a very signature development, simply because now even the Trump administration would be bound by this particular legislation.
Right.
This is not just understanding or exchanging views. This has become part of a legislation. So on defense and security issues, I would say, whether it is combating terrorism, whether it is now thinking about the concerns in South China Sea, whether it is talking about the more and more cooperation in Indian Ocean, or even having some kind of connectivity between South Asia and Central Asia, or India's role in West Asia, in every aspect of defense and security, there is more and more convergence of interest between India and the United States, and this is the key aspect so far in the relationship between the two countries.
Ambassador Kumar, how much of it, the credit of these relations should be given to the leaders of these two nations?
Well, you have all the environment, all the compulsion, but somebody had to take a decision. Buck stop there, so leaders get really large share of the credit, but fact is circumstances also force you to that direction. Now 20 years back, even if you ask for, they will not sell you needle, forget about all these aircraft fighters. So international scenario has changed, circumstances changed, then you have to do this. Other is that, look, apart from these deals, one area which we have not touched so far is that clean energy. The lady who writes for Council of Foreign Relations in New York, she written an article, during Obama, nobody has done so much to bring India and US in clean energy cooperation, especially during Modi's time. Enormous things, but they don't get written about in press because they are not so, should I say, sexy or whatever word you use it. They are not very hot topic, but certainly a lot has been going on behind the scene, very important, which again, I am sure, even Mr. Trump's team, though he has appointed somebody, going to appoint somebody to head the environment who had earlier been criticizing the same body. So we will see what happens in the future. But this is one area, clean energy area has enormous potential cooperation between the two countries.
But what about the level of investments that we had been expecting from the Americans?
Well, I mean, this is a tricky area, but you see,
despite the fact that we have economic and other cooperation platforms, and you know, one of the key challenges, though we don't want to, I really don't want to jump to the challenges now, but that has been that how at the working level can these you know, things be strengthened?
I think you need to integrate the two economies. You have different systems,
right?
So you you see, we are doing things like the GST. That's an important factor here. Maybe even this demonetization drive, ultimately the digitization of the economy and so on. These are aimed at integrating the economies. It'll facilitate investment. I mean, in the early environment, I don't think it would have been easy for American companies to, you know, actually easily invest in India.
You know, one of the things, Professor Mahapatra, it's a question which is unignorable, to see how Obama, particularly as a leader, had taken America forward, and do you think also backward in many ways, in some ways? Was there something which you think that shouldn't be seen as an achievement of the Obama administration internationally?
Internationally, actually, you know, it all depends on the perception, how you really look at it. If you, but before I answer this, just one line about your role of the individual. Role of the individual is very key. Let's talk about Prime Minister Modi. It was Prime Minister Modi who goes to the US and signs a joint statement, and the title of the statement was Chalein Saath Saath, symbolic but important. Prime Minister Modi, before going to the landing up in the USA, he wrote an article in Wall Street Journal to reach out to the corporate Americans. Great economist Manmohan Singh ji did not think about it. It was Prime Minister Modi who thought that one of the best ways symbolically and substantively to promote Indo-US relationship would be to invite the American president as the chief guest in the Republican Day parade.
Right.
We invited the Iranians, the Chinese, the Pakistanis, never an American. So, a role of the individual and how an individual leader also thinks out of the box and takes initiative, both at the substantive and symbolic level, actually is the key.
So actually, would you think that this is basically an overtures made by India that were responded to by America, or was it a two-way?
No, if you see the other side,
Right.
here is President Barack Obama, who thought India is an important country, I must visit twice, and he did that. Never before it happened. Here is an American president who said most of the American presidents visited towards the closing months or years of their administration.
That's right.
Let me visit very early in my administration. He did. So, and I can give you many examples to suggest that while the circumstances are important, the values are important, interests are important, economic, political and military, even the role of the individual is key. How
But
an
I want to
individual will
understand, was America dealing with a different India during these years that you saw this kind of change really happening? I'll come to you, Ambassador Kumar.
You
Yes.
see, yes, you are right. Again, just to harp on my point, let me tell you the personality clash between Mrs. Indira Gandhi and Nixon.
Okay.
Whereas both Obama and Manmohan Singh ji and Obama and Modi ji, they had really fantastic chemistry. Without the good chemistry of the leadership, relationship cannot move ahead.
Ambassador Kumar.
Well, I agree with him. I myself said leaders play a great role. But unless you have the structure and policies in place, for example, if India was still following the same economic policy of 70s, 80s, Mr. Modi will not be able to do anything.
It's a bit of both.
American will not be interested here. If you didn't have international environment where India can buy things from US, you don't have defense trade.
Right.
So individuals can be important, certainly. And
Okay.
person deal with the leader of the day. Same Obama called Manmohan Singh my guru. He called him philosopher. Because
So
a
the
professional,
perceptions,
you have to
I would
deal
say,
with the person who is in the job.
I would say the perceptions to an extent as it is were changing, and as I said that America was responding to a different, a new India. But Professor,
answer your main question?
Professor, yes,
Yeah.
Chintamani Mahapatra, I wanted you to please
Yes,
respond to that one. Yes, please.
The main question is, critics will say what I'm going to say just now. Number one, they will say that look at this gentleman who struck a deal with Iran. Now the deal is so weak that after 15 years, if Iran wants, it can go nuclear. So Israel is actually not safe. Look at this gentleman. He made a big promise that he would support the idea of a nuclear weapon-free world, and his predecessors never did that. But when making this kind of speech, which apparently looks very attractive, the bottom line was this: until and unless the other countries don't give up their nuclear weapons, we will keep our nuclear weapons. So it is a meaningless speech, they will say. And then he reaches out to Cuba,
Cubans.
but he could not do anything about North Korea, which went on testing bombs and the missiles and all. He failed to do so.
What about the mess that was created in the Middle East, the Arab world?
That is another fantastic point that you raised just now. You know, it was nice to wind up the war operations in Iraq, but when you removed all the American troops from there and you gave a free hand to the local people and the factors there, that created a fertile ground for the ISIS to take birth. And this is the argument even Donald Trump made.
Right.
And there is some sense in that argument. It is not a useless argument. The fact remains that if Obama wanted, he could have stayed on for some more time, stabilized the situation, rather than run away from a country where his predecessor took the country into military intervention, and Iraq became more unstable after the military intervention. And the way Obama administration responded to Arab Spring, it was a series of failures that critics would say.
Largely repeating the same roles that his predecessors had played in war zone or conflict areas.
Particularly responding to Arab Spring in Egypt, he abandoned a dictator who was pro-American, but then later it led to the rise to power of Muslim Brotherhood, and later again there was military coup, and the military is back in power, right? Except Tunisia, Arab Spring has failed everywhere. As far as Syria is concerned, he made a tall claim, drew a red line. If chemical weapons are going to be used, we will get in. Chemical weapons were used and could not. And he could not respond to even Russia's flexing of muscle in Crimea and Ukraine and Georgia, just name it.
Mr. Devraj, do you think that Obama's legacy will then be, it will be viewed, but only under the shadow of what America has usually stood for?
Yes, absolutely. You're right there. I think there are many things that Obama left, open-ended. I think Trump has, he'll have to cover a lot of ground in the especially, I mean, if you look at something like China, it's a huge problem there for I think the whole world. I mean, the conflict in the South China Sea. I don't know how Trump is, I mean, he said a lot of things, but practicality is a different thing.
So there are domestic as well as international concerns for the new administration too, and especially the world is keenly going to watch now how the Trump leadership will bring in any change or no change in the policies that America has pursued so far. More on that, time for a very quick break in Insight Now. Welcome back. You're watching Insight. The US-India relationship has prospered over time. In fact, support for the India-US relationship is among the few policy issues on which the Democrats and Republicans are united. Does that indicate a major shift in the US's approach over the years? And since ties between the world's oldest democracy and the world's biggest democracy had long been characterized by mutual suspicion, but is it now being replaced by optimism? If yes, then what are the challenges? With just 7 days to go for the swearing-in ceremony of the United States of America's new president, Donald Trump, the question to ask is how the Trump administration will deal with India. Trump's team is skeptical of China. There is no way to contain China without a close relationship between the US and India. While the US president-elect may be a fan of India's, many in the country are waiting anxiously to see how his administration manages H-1B visas. Indian IT firms, which use these visas to send thousands of employees to work in the US every year, will be particularly concerned by Trump's American Workers First rhetoric. President-elect Donald Trump's acceptance speech on November 9 began with a pledge that he would be the president for all Americans. After a bitterly fought campaign, he said that Americans needed to work together. The question is if the United States is headed for radical change on issues pertaining to international trade, immigration and foreign policy. So any decision on H-1B will impact India. This became evident when top IT companies lost crores in market valuation following a stock value plunge, which happened just after a bill proposing key changes to the US H-1B program was reintroduced in the US Congress. The Indian IT sector, which has over the time become a reason for debate for misusing the work visas, fears job losses now. So will the change in leadership be a major test for the bilateral relationship too? That's one of the key things we'll be looking at. Well, Mr. Devraj, how do you look at the issues which India has been concerned about, and how do you think will the Trump administration be responding to them?
Well, so certainly the H-1B visa thing, it is important because, you know, I mean, given India's situation, you know, we invest heavily in software and IT services. We have a lot of experts. I mean, unless that there's continued interaction, especially with American software companies, I don't know. And I think Obama is just, Trump has just been like shooting his mouth off about this. Ultimately, it will depend on the American corporations, how they want to, I mean, they need skilled people. So that's one thing. But I think that even more than that is the strategic concerns that will bring on a crunch point, let us say. I think that crunch point will be China, however you look at it. You can't get away from that.
Right.
And everything seems to be converging to a particular point here.
And that's going to be, you think that's going to be one of those tricky areas. Ambassador Kumar, how do you look at these issues that India has been a little concerned about, especially the trade visa issues?
Well, look, we should see in the long term. First presidency Obama, in his speech he used to talk about what? Jobs going from Buffalo to Bangalore. He was talking about the same thing. But then he settled down, he found his own company were telling him, NASSCOM had done a report, which I referred to our function last year. They say Indian IT companies invested $2 billion. They paid about $20 billion in taxes. They have created 400,000 jobs, 400,000 jobs long. And these people are needed because US needs every 2.3 million trained IT tech. They don't have. You take from India, from China, from Filipino, Vietnam, you have to take from unless you create that, because they don't. So I think he will also settle down, and many of multinationals do. Only thing, at the same time, Indian IT companies will also have, I was reading somewhere that Infosys, Tata Consultancy and Wipro, they are already in process of really offering through Twitter, because Mr. Trump like Twitter, that this is what we are going to do. We are going to replace so many more sort of Indians by Americans, and we will not try to do. So this give and take, I think they will settle down somewhere. This emotional issue during election campaign and beginning is very top priority. The more you come, then you have so many other big issues come in front. But I will go further in terms of broader India-US economic relation.
Right.
The glue is complementarity in economic. The defense trade is just the beginning. If you see all the three wings of Indian defense forces, they have long wish list of what they want to buy. And that will create thousands and thousands of jobs in US. This will go. Other is that you have, as you mentioned about China. China, everybody criticizes, but at the same time, I must add that US, China are so interdependent in economic terms, they cannot afford to rock the boat. China has more than $800 billion in your treasury bonds there. They own, one of the richest Chinese said, look, my own company itself, I have invested $3 billion in US. I have 20,000 Americans working for me. So if you want to harm us, we can harm you, because if you really treat, this is not done.
Is this US, India, China triangle really going to take a different shape in the coming years? Or do you think they'll have to naturally remain the allies that they are, probably in the same manner that they stand today?
You know, the US and China are very close economically, but let's underline the fact, what kind of things Chinese are selling to the Americans and what kind of stuff Americans are selling to China. If there is a trade war, China would lose more, relatively speaking. The Americans will say that we will buy all your toys and shoes and clothing from Costa Rica and maybe Philippines or India or things like that. But it never, in real life, it never happens like that, one-on-one trade war. American companies have invested in China, and jobs are created at home. So it's a very complex one. How it is going to be played out, it cannot be a full-scale war between the two. Having said that, at the strategic level, at a broad level, here is a president who says, I am going to make America great again. So who is coming on the way? It is China, which is the next emerging superpower. And the way China is flexing its military muscle in the Asia Pacific, particularly South China Sea, the way China is troubling all American allies like the Filipinos and the Vietnamese and so many others, it is an affront to the United States of America. It is really creating challenge for the American credibility in the region. Will these countries now rely on the US for protection if the US is not able to do anything about China?
So where does India fit in?
India fits in because India and China, if you compare, two are large countries, old civilizations, huge population, and economically bright people in both the countries because of the systemic changes and the reforms. There is a big gap between Chinese economic reforms and Indian economic reforms in terms of timeline. The gap is there, no doubt about it. But if you see the real core, it is India which can really balance China more than a Japan or Vietnam or anything like that. So India's role will continue to be important for the United States if it wants to balance out.
When we talk about balance, China has reached a stage. Recently, the former national secretary, Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon, he wrote from the Asia Times. He said, look, no Asian country wants to choose between US and China. It's not in their interest. And if you want to counter China, India alone cannot do. You will have to line up all the ASEAN group. You have Japan there, you have Australia there, you have India there, and maybe you also throw in South Korea. You have to have kind of, what can you do with that? Emergence of China is a fact. You can't deny it, you can't stop it. Their economy today on the PP basis is bigger than the US, PP basis. They are having more money to all these over, one bed, one road, or whatever your economic corridor package. They can throw billions of dollars, USA doesn't have.
But you know, there had been these talks of how these two emerging economies can change the world order. They have to an extent. But can they surpass an economy of the US given the climate change challenge?
Just listen, just see the figures. 5 years back when Raghuram Ram was here, he said, look, people say China economy will take over American economy in next 5 years. It's a pipe dream. They were at that time less than 10 billion. America was 17. What is now? America 17.7 trillion, they are at 10.5 trillion. The gap is really very narrowing in sort of net terms. But if you take in terms of the 48 countries in the world today, China is the biggest trading partner. All the ASEAN countries, they trade with China more than USA. When we talk about recently, when the question came, Trump said, we are not interested in TPP. We don't want Asia pivot. Suddenly you found all the ASEAN countries except Vietnam and Singapore, they are all latching on to China, including those who have territorial dispute, because they can't afford to have strained relations with a country on which they depend so much economically.
Mr. Devraj, there had been this involvement of the US for a very long time in this whole region, the region which has the potential to grow, especially the two countries who dominate the market, the Asian markets in particular. But at the same time, there are security concerns in this region, triggered either by Pakistan or with a very, volatile position in Afghanistan.
Actually, this is the legacy of the Second World War, really. I mean, you had all these SEATO, CENTO, all of these alliances. I mean, right until the, long after the end of the Vietnam War, these arrangements continued. But as the ambassador pointed out, the emergence of China as a potential superpower has completely destabilized that kind of an arrangement. And many of the ASEAN countries, they are wary of, in spite of the territorial disputes and everything. So right now it's a kind of still, in a state of a flux, really. You do have countries like Australia, which can be influential here, because many of the ASEAN countries also look to Australia. You see, they emigrate to Australia. Australia maintains really good relations with all of the ASEAN countries. But the problem really is the pushy nature of the Chinese state. I mean, they're forever pushing into South Asia. You can see the CPEC, or they're pushing into Africa even on the other side. They have so much money that they need to invest. They need to push. They need raw materials. Where are they going to go for those raw materials? So these are factors that compel the Chinese state to do the things that they do. Then I don't see that, and they're not necessarily afraid of the US. And not, I mean, the sea drone.
Yeah, and the fact that US keeps nudging China on the South China Sea issue, there had been these currency wars which have played out in all these years that we've seen between India and between US and China. But how critical that way would be the times ahead, since President-elect Trump says America first, both internationally as well as, I would say, in a way domestically too. But if America's first is going to remain America's policy, will that prove to be a big challenge again, the way it has been for these two emerging economies? I'm talking about India and China together, which in itself is also very contentious.
Definitely. You see, the Americans, America has been described as a frontier country. It always has a frontier. If it is not Islam, if it's not the Soviet Union, it's Islam. If it's not that, it will be China. It's already China. They will never allow the Chinese to grow beyond a certain point. It was they who brought up, during the Kissinger years, we saw how they built up China as an economic entity. They helped to open up China. They're not going to let that go. I mean, they have, if you look at what the think tanks do, I mean, that's the thing about the American state. They have these think tanks. They have strategies. They have long-term planning. I mean, let's never underestimate that. It's like a cat and mouse game. They'll allow this to grow up to a point, like a bonsai, and then they'll begin to
do something. Right. So that certainly is going to be one of the key things. But how important is the US-Russia angle to look at?
It is very important. This is part of that great game that might unfold in the future. I keep on saying this. Russia happens to be the only country in the world which can pose an existential threat to the United States of America and the world. They have the overkill capacity, not China. Right? China is an economic competitor. Russia is a military power. By inching towards Russia, I think the advisors of the Trump administration is telling him one of the best ways to actually build up pressure against China is, on the one hand, you build up ties with India, on the other hand, keep a close relationship with Russia, don't annoy them beyond a point. After all, whatever Russia did in Crimea, Ukraine, Georgia, US could not do anything about it, right? Because they have the real power. So I think this is going to be a game changer. But how Russia is going to behave, we have to see. We have to see that. But on this America first thing that you raised, this is my point, that this is going to really hunt the United States of America. Why? Saying that America should be great again is okay, everybody will accept it. But the moment you say America first, and Indians will say India first, Chinese will say China first, then it is going back to nationalism. This is going to promote protectionism. This is going to lead to a lot of problem in trade relationship. So beyond a point, this America first is going to even affect India, because it's not just a question of jobs. Look at Make in India. Now Lockheed Martin, Boeing and BAE Systems want to produce co-develop, co-produce things, military equipment in India. Now suppose he says no, America first, only American workers will be produced only in the United States of America. What will happen to the company? What will happen to Make in India? So how he is going to follow this policy, to what extent, is going to be key to determine the nature of relationship between
That's an
India
interesting
and the US.
point. Ambassador Kumar, do you think much lies now in finding the details of what's exactly going to be Trump's policy agenda?
Yes, it's too early. I think we are going by his statement, going by little symbolic
or maybe
appointment.
Twitter,
I was reading this morning itself an article written by Kanishka Tharoor. Now he talked about, look, he has got a cabinet whose minister was $12.5 billion, the richest cabinet ever found. And you have all these persons who have been themselves investing hugely inside USA in different countries. You talk about so much of conflict of interest in business terms. Somebody has invested $1 billion somewhere, you become suddenly, now you have Secretary of State, who has been all his career the biggest oil company. Suddenly you Secretary. Now this is, a lot of things will happen, but they will settle down certainly, slowly, because as I have been saying, institutions and circumstances really impact a great deal. Now for example, Asia we are talking about, what they want, including India, that US remains able to provide an underwrite security guarantee in Asia Pacific. We all want that they may remain benign hegemon, that whatever NSA has been saying, because you have no other country who can individually or as a group really replace US. You can't, just don't have that kind of, you need somebody who can be, you may have a lot of problem with them, but they can be. But what I am more worried about is these kind of people who are around him. They don't have that kind of world vision. They have been corporate honchos. They know how to run company, how to make more profit. But making profit is one thing, but seeing things in strategic terms, what is a long-term national
And will he have
different.
to, will he have to strike a balance between his domestic and foreign priorities?
First, he should divest from his own institutions and trusts. He says, I want to do it. I will create a trust and make my daughter or sons in charge of that. A lot of things will unfold. I personally, it's too early. We are making prematurely, because he has to change. He has to learn. Even the way he has been behaving, let's say with his agencies, which is briefing every day.
Right.
Now you have to find some kind of working, functional relationship with mutual trust, which is really necessary for national policy.
Professor Mahapatra, the kind of undercurrent of suspicion that India has usually faced from a country like America, you see that that has certainly changed. There is a kind of optimism that has grown over the years. But what are going to be the key, future plans for India and the picture in which you see India-US relations in future? What are the key things that the administration both ends should be keeping in mind?
I think by and large, there is bipartisan consensus in the US about having good, friendly, strategic partnership with India. And the same is in India also. By and large, most of the political parties, probably with the solitary exception of the CPM and the CPI, they want good relationship with the United States of America. At the higher level, we find a lot of convergence of interest because both India and the US are against ISIS, against Taliban. Both India and the US are against Pakistan manufacturing more and more nuclear weapons, whereas the country is on fire. Both of us are against China flexing its military muscle, and we want China to be a good cooperative partner, a stakeholder, and not a muscle flexer and all that. On climate change, both of us are on the same platform.
More
on
or
outer
less.
space, same thing.
Yeah.
So broad level, there is convergence. I think Trump administration, there will be hiccups in between, but things will settle down.
But Pakistan is not ruled out between India and US.
The problem is this, Pakistan will always try to do what it has been doing. It will try to drag in the Kashmir issue and tell the Americans that we will fight those terrorists which are against you, not against India. And if you really want us to stop terrorism thing, help us in solving
So
the
no
Kashmir
major
problem.
shift, do you see any major shift in America's approach towards the world otherwise?
I think, given the personality of Trump and the kind of people he has selected, all billionaires, all have different ways of looking at the world, all have different ways of making deals. I expect a substantial change in next 4 years through trial and error.
Okay.
It is not going to be business as usual at all.
Okay.
Because this man has come to power without the support of the Republican Party, without the support of the mainstream media in the United States, without the support of the large number of middle class in the United States. He only the Rust Belt workers, who wanted jobs. He targeted them, and very tactically, he actually won the electoral votes, and he won it. So he is going to bring about certain changes. There will be resistance, there will be tussle, there will be dysfunctional government also one can expect.
Okay.
So troubled times are ahead.
Ambassador Kumar.
I think he's following Milton Friedman, noble lawyer, who said there is nothing called free lunch.
Okay.
He says, if you want something from us, pay. He tells the Europeans, you want, okay,
He's
pay
a
us.
businessman.
But
He believes in
must
it.
transact. You want something, quid pro. You want something from me, I will do for you, you please pay for us. And that kind of being a businessman is always businessman.
Okay, Mr. Devraj, it's a new person, it's a new kind of leadership. He has his own personality too, walking along with his position as the president, as the new president of America. How will that change things for India? Will that remain a challenge?
Yeah, of course. But I think that the foundations for the Indo-US relationship has been, laid a long time ago, and it's been progressing. Like I said, it's on a particular trajectory. I think what we should watch is how the logistics exchange deal works out. I think in a couple of months we'll see some deals coming through, and that's given a framework for really deep cooperation of the type we never had before.
What are the other challenges that you'd like? Are there other challenges that you'd like to flag for the Trump administration? Domestically, we know are going to be the replacement law for Obamacare and the other things. What about immigration, Iran, sanctions?
Iran, the Middle East is a huge problem for him. I mean, how to keep his European partners in the game. I mean, there have been hiccups there as well during the Obama and also early administrations. How are they going to pursue their Middle East policy after all, this disaster that has happened in Syria and the earlier one in Iraq? Even Iran, as the ambassador pointed out, we don't know where it's going.
Professor Mahapatra, some sort of continuity in what we have seen so far, or some major shifts?
I think more continuity. But there will be substantial changes as well.
Okay.
And people are worried about the possibility of the emergence of a Trumpistan, like Pakistan, Hindustan.
Okay, let's spare more hours for that as to see where exactly is this administration really going to go.
Relations will certainly further improve during this. I'm not apprehensive at all, because
So the optimism around India-US ties remain. On that note, we'll wrap up this discussion. Thank you very much, panel, for joining me. Well, that's all for today in Insight. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.